Değerli konuklar, hepiniz hoş geldiniz. VitrA olarak sizleri İngiliz Kraliyet Mimarlar Enstitüsü RIBA işbirliğiyle Eylül 2018'den bu yana düzenlediğimiz Mimar Sohbetleri kapsamında ağırlamaktan büyük mutluluk duyuyoruz. Türkiye'de doğan VitrA markası bugün ürünleriyle 75'ten fazla ülkeye ulaşıyor. Ülkemizin seramik mirasını ve banyo kültürünü tasarım ve inovasyon gücümüzle harmanladığımız 66 yıllık önemli bir deneyime sahibiz. Banyoda ihtiyaç duyulan tüm ürünleri tasarlama ve üretme yetkinliğimizle sağlıklı bir yaşam için çözümler geliştiriyoruz. Tüm faaliyetlerimizde sürdürülebilir bir geleceği gözetiyor, çevre, kaynaklar, toplum ve iş dünyası arasındaki hassas dengeyi korumak üzere çalışıyoruz. Bu kapsamda geçtiğimiz yıl gündemimizde bizi gururlandıran iki önemli konu vardı. Bunlardan ilki, kendi kategorisinde dünyanın ilk ve tek %100 geri dönüştürülmüş seramik lavabosunu üretmemizdi. Çevre dostu lavabolarımızın içerik olarak yaklaşık %100'ü kırık seramikler de dahil olmak üzere üretim sürecinde ortaya çıkan ve bertarafa giden atıklardan üretildi. Diğeri ise karo seramik üretim tesisimizin Dünya Ekonomik Forumu'nun Global Lighthouse Network'e katılmasıydı. Endüstri 4.0 teknolojilerini kullanan üretim tesisimizle bu network'e katılan dünyanın ilk karo seramik üreticisi olduk. Kıymetli misafirler, üretici kimliğimizle banyoda yepyeni ürünler tasarlarken bir yandan da mimarlık ekosisteminin gelişimine katkıda bulunacak çalışmalar yapıyoruz. Bu kapsamda kimi zaman bugün olduğu gibi değerli projelerin ortağı oluyoruz, kimi zaman da kendi projelerimizi tasarlayarak mimarlık kültürünü destekliyoruz. Yalnız Türkiye'de değil, aktif olarak yer aldığımız pazarlarda da sektör profesyonelleriyle diyalog kurmamızı sağlayan çalışmaları çok önemsiyoruz. 7. yılına giren RIBA, VitrA ile Mimar Sohbetleri bu çalışmaların örneklerinden biri. Aynı zamanda Venedik Bienali Uluslararası Mimarlık Sergisi'ndeki Türkiye pavyonunun da eş sponsorlarından biriyiz. Kıymetli misafirler, RIBA işbirliği ile düzenlediğimiz etkinlikler kapsamında İstanbul'da 5. kez buluşuyoruz. Bugünkü konuğumuz, Ahan ve Mies van der Rohe Mimarlık Ödülleri sahibi, Sunoheta'nın kurucu ortağı Craig Dykers. Kendisini sahneye almadan önce konuşmasını yapmak üzere RIBA Program Koordinatörü Kate Dooley'i kürsüye davet ediyorum. Kate ve Craig'in konuşmalarının ardından soru-cevap bölümümüz olacak. Sorularınızı saklayabilirsiniz. Kate, stage is yours.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening for our 5th international talk here in Istanbul, part of our prestigious RIBA plus VitrA talk series, sponsored by VitrA Bathrooms. My name is Kate Dooley, and I am the Public Programme Coordinator at the Royal Institute of British Architects, or RIBA, in London, where I lead on delivering and curating RIBA's public programme of talks and events. But what is RIBA? Founded in 1834, RIBA is a global professional membership body driving excellence in architecture. Our membership represents, recognises and celebrates the gold standard for architecture and design. And as an organisation, we serve our members and a society in order to deliver better buildings, better places, stronger communities and a sustainable environment, focusing on our strategic priorities, the climate emergency, equity, diversity and inclusion, providing value to our members, being a loud voice in the industry to influence and advocate on behalf of the profession and the wider society, ensuring RIBA is a high-performing organisation. We do this through education, continuing professional development, publishing awards, and delivering an extensive architecture programme to the public and our members, of which we have 58,000 across the world, with over 4,000 of those members based outside of the UK. And we do this whilst caring for one of the largest and most wide-ranging architectural collections in the world. RIBA is unique in being both a membership body and an accredited public museum. We have over 4 million items in our collection, collected and catalogued over almost 200 years, with some items dating back to the 15th century. This also includes the collection in our British Architectural Library, housed at our headquarters in London, 66 Portland Place, which is free and open to everyone. So here you can see that we use our collections to curate a number of free exhibitions across the year, alongside commissioning new displays and installations by architects and designers who provide a contemporary response to our historical material. Here is Wide-Angle View, Architecture as Social Space in the Man Plan series, 1969 to 70, which was exhibited earlier this year at 66 Portland Place, a groundbreaking exploration of architecture's impact on society through the lens of the architectural review magazine, Man Plan. Here we have Long Life, Low Energy, Designing for a Circular Economy, an exhibition demonstrating how the principles of the circular economy can help create a more sustainable and net zero architecture for the future. This was first exhibited in London and then toured to RIBA North in Liverpool last year. But this evening's talk is part of the RIBA plus VitrA talk series, and that's our public offering to architects and society to provide a platform to hear lectures by emerging and established architects from across the world. 2024 is the 6th year of the partnership, and since it began in 2018, we've heard from over 80 speakers, including Ben van Berkel and Daniel Liebeskind here in Istanbul, and in the UK, Royal Gold Medal winner Yasmin Lari, Kate McIntosh, Asif Khan, Mario Cucinella, and only last week, Lina Goatme. Since we were last here in Turkey, we've hosted 60 speakers from 19 countries, some of whom you can see here. And these talks are hosted at our headquarters in London, 66 Portland Place, and at RIBA North in Liverpool, but also across the UK regionally, for example here, at the recently opened Aviva Studios in Manchester, where we were delighted to invite Ellen van Loon last year. These talks are all available to view at the RIBA plus VitrA page on architecture.com, covering the extensive 6-year partnership, so I do encourage you to watch them, and there's some great content there to see. But back to this evening. Tonight we are incredibly lucky to hear from Craig Dykers, founding partner at Snøhetta. A global transdisciplinary practice, Snøhetta was founded in 1989 as an integrated architecture, landscape architecture and design company focused on well-being, biodiversity and sustainability. The practice is based in New York City and Oslo and has 5 additional global offices. They have been recognised and amongst the top 10 most innovative companies by the Wall Street Journal and Fast Company magazine. As founder of the practice, our speaker this evening, Craig Dykers, has led many prominent projects, including the Alexandria Library in Egypt, awarded the Aga Khan Award for Architecture, the Oslo Opera in Norway, awarded the Mies van der Rohe Award, the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, the New Jocelyn Museum of Art, and several new libraries, including the Calgary Central Library. Recent projects underway include the Theodore Roosevelt Library, the Ford Motor Company Design Campus, and the Museum of Natural Science in Mexico, amongst many other projects nationally and internationally, some of which you'll hear more about this evening. So, without any further delay, please welcome to the stage Craig Dykers.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's wonderful to be here. And thank you all for braving the traffic to be here. You each deserve an award for making it through the traffic. I know it can be very difficult. I also want to thank VitrA and the Royal Institute of British Architects for hosting this talk. It's very important to us. And as was maybe mentioned earlier, or you may know, many years ago, my business partner, Kjetil Thorsen, and myself gave a similar lecture in London. And we were just after receiving the Royal Institute of British Architects International Fellowship. So it's very nice for us to be represented, and I'm happy to represent my business partners as well as our companies here tonight. I would also like to thank the support that we've been given by so many people since we've been here. So thank you for all of your help. I shall move along. And you probably perhaps know that our name is unusual. It's named after a mountain. And we had considered calling ourselves Ararat, but we chose Snøhetta rather than a Turkish mountain. But they're very similar. Both Mount Ararat and Snøhetta are beautiful mountains that rise from the landscape and represent architecture, landscape, and thinking about the world around us. I am an architect, so I'm happy to be a part of this profession, and many of you may be architects. I'm proud of what all of us do as architects and landscape architects and interior architects to help make the world a better place. It's an honorable profession and very useful to so many people in the world. But most people misunderstand what we do. They think we sit around and make sketches like this or draw on the back of a napkin with a bottle of wine nearby. And somehow these sketches miraculously become spectacular designs. People also think that we have sort of a genius idea in the flash of brilliance that occurs in the middle of the night or when we're sitting thinking and meditating. And while you can have ideas rather quickly in such a scenario, the ideas that we have often are not built around this fiction of a flash of genius. Our studio works against both of these ways of thinking. We like to work collaboratively as designers and architects together, and our ideas don't come from a singular source as a flash of brilliance. Instead, we often ask questions about ourselves, or we ask questions about the things we have been questioned to do. And that's a very important idea to understand, because if you don't ask the right question, how will you get the right answer? And this is something that helps us see how our ideas can form. A really great question is the kind of question a child would ask. And when a child asks a question of an adult, they know they're going to question the answer. It doesn't matter what you tell them, if it's right or wrong or clear or science or whatever it might be. A child will say, well, okay, yes, but why is that true? So these questions that are powerful lead to more questions rather than immediate answers. Some questions are rather hard to understand. Some questions are hooks to other questions. Some questions are personal. Some questions make sense in another language, or they're very stylish questions. Some questions are about existence. Some questions seem like they're the last question, but a good question allows us to see other things about our lives and the world around us. One question we have is, what does it mean to be a human? Why are we human as opposed to another type of animal or even a plant? One thing that makes us human is that we balance the world of prediction and intuition. We like to predict what's going to happen tomorrow, but we like to feel that we sense the world around us as our own personal existence or idea. So both of those things, intuition and prediction, drive our thoughts as humans. All of us have some of that in us. We also are a member of a wide spectrum of life. We often think just about the people that we are and that are around us, but there are many animals that surround us that are important in our lives and in our existence. And of course, there are many plants that support our lives. All of these things work together in a continuum. And there's many, many things that connect these three worlds. And we should never forget that we're not the only thing alive on Earth. There are all of these other worlds that we connect to. This is why this conversation is called Living Buildings and Thoughtful Landscapes. Most of us stereotype architecture or landscape architecture into ideas that aren't exactly correct. We tend to think that landscapes are the living component of design and that buildings are the thoughtful, conceptual component of what we design. In fact, buildings can be alive. They have a lifespan. They can participate in a living world. And landscapes can be as thoughtful and conceptual as a building. So we have to erase those boundaries between types of architecture and design and see them, even if different, related to one another in an important way. Most of you may know us from these two projects from our past. We first won the Library of Alexandria in Egypt back in 1989, so that was a long time ago, perhaps before some of you were born. Later we went on to build the National Ballet and Opera in Oslo, and these two projects received a great deal of attention. But we have done many other things around the world, and since that time, we've established many great studios around the world. We have a studio in Australia, studios in Australia, in China, of course in Europe, both in France and Austria as well as Norway, and we have a studio in America. So I would like to first start by saying I recognize and acknowledge the power that all of these studios are giving us as one company. I happen to be here as one of many tonight, and all of their contributions have been an important part of our work. But I will focus mostly tonight on the part of our work that you may not know very much about. It's the work we do in America. Often our work isn't understood in Europe or in Asia and other places, but we've done a considerable amount of unusual work that is a part of the portfolio of our company. And because of the internet, sometimes you only see or learn about the things closest to you and not so much about the things further away. So I will talk mostly about those projects tonight. The first project I'd like to show is a refurbishment or an improvement of an art museum in Austin, Texas. It's called the Blanton Art Museum in the southern central part of Texas. It's a place where a university is, and the project was to take an existing building that had been having trouble for many years attracting visitors. It had a courtyard that was very hot and difficult to be around, and no one knew where the entrance and what the use was of this museum project for quite some time, so it was suffering. So we created a thought process that might allow people to feel welcome in this project. And we began by looking at the university history. As you know, universities have a long and very interesting history that relate to our world today. This university in Texas was founded in the late 19th century, and it's a very beautiful museum designed originally by two wonderful early architects, Cass Gilbert and Paul Cray. And the campus just has had a nice feeling to walk through, as you can see in this picture. The museum itself had a beautiful collection of modern art, of art from Europe, of art from America, art from all of the Americas. So you could learn quite a lot. And in fact, I went to this school, and it was a big part of my learning to go to this museum and see the world new through art. So it had a powerful character, but it had been lost over time. What had happened was that a series of design ideas had been built in the space between two buildings that were the museum, and the museum was split into two components. While there were trees in this space, which were rather pretty to look at, they actually were getting their roots trampled, and they were losing some of their ability to survive. Also, the trees made it so you couldn't see where you were, and in fact, they did not make the space cooler because their canopy was low, and the humidity of these trees actually made it feel a little bit warmer in a very hot, humid climate, something that you might know about here. So we decided to transplant these trees in other places where they would be happier and rethink the design so that it would make a cool place for people to rest before they go to the museum. There are two important buildings nearby. On the left is the Texas State Capitol building, which of course all things in Texas have to be big, so it is slightly taller than the U.S. Capitol building in Washington, D.C. It's a rather significant structure. And to the right is a famous sculpture by a very well-known artist named Ellsworth Kelly. It's one of his last, if not, it is his last project before he died. He was a well-known artist around the world. We knew that we had to relate to these two things. They're very historical in nature, but we didn't want to be a prisoner of all of this history. We wanted to have a dialogue with history. And I think this is something you understand here in Turkey, which has so much history. If you only copy history, you have no way of understanding the future. But you don't want to ignore the history, hence you may lose all of the value that it has given us over the years. So we adapted these thoughts into this canopy design, which is sort of petals like on a flower or leaves on a tree. And they were unconnected. They don't touch each other. But when you get them near to each other, they create an arch that is imagined, an imaginary arch, which related to the arches of the historical structures, the Capitol and the nearby campus that was made in the 19th century. Those petals, those flower petals, together built up this environment that allows you to see beauty in the spaces between them and also see beauty in their composition. And they also provided a fantastic amount of shade and shadow, which I'll talk about in a minute, that was very useful. They provide an entrance or gateway to the university and tell people that there's an art museum or something unusual here. This is not a classroom. It's not a government building. It's something that's creative. So it attracts you from that perspective. When you look back towards the Texas Capitol building that you can see, these imaginary arches frame the Capitol to bring it into the picture while not recreating the arches themselves or the dome of the Capitol itself. We also built these unusual entries areas that you can see here, which mark the entrance to the museum, and they're sort of upside down arches that are brightly colored, colors you might see in Mexico or the regions nearby Austin, Texas. Now, when you are under the shade of a tree, it can feel wonderful, especially if the tree is high enough and the light that comes through the tree is not dark. It's a little bit of light and a little bit of dark. And when you have both together, you actually feel cooler than if it were all dark. So if you make a canopy that's solid, the difference between that area and the area of sun can be too extreme in your mind's psychology for you to feel the cool character of the tree or the shade. So we perforated the canopies so that light would just drip through. We also created these canopies out of material that's very high technology. It's kind of a high technology fiberglass or glass and fiber structure that is very strong. It's as strong as the materials that are used to send spaceships into orbit. Also, that material brings the heat of the sun down through its structure and into the stem. It doesn't reflect the heat. It brings the heat into the stem by virtue of its color and the material it's made out of. But before the heat reaches the ground, it absorbs it inside the interior of this canopy. The result is that you feel about 10 degrees cooler under one of these canopies than you do just stepping right to the side of it in the sun. It also is in an area where there are very strong hurricanes or tornadoes. It has to withstand very strong and powerful winds. And they're standing alone, so they have to support themselves. They can't rely on the other canopies to keep them up. To make the light that we wanted, we decided to build a prototype, a sort of copy of what we wanted to make before we made it. This was done during the pandemic, and originally we were going to take this prototype to Texas from New York, where we were, and set it up there. But the pandemic didn't allow us to do it because we couldn't travel. So one of the architects in our staff decided we would set up these different filigree or structures on the roof of their apartment building. And we would test the light on the roof of their apartment building because we could do that in the pandemic. So here's an example of some of the tests we were doing. And then we eventually were able to make a prototype in Texas to test it under the Texas sun. When you look up through these canopies, you see the sky framed in a unique way, and the sunlight comes through in very unusual ways. These holes that you see are not perfect holes. On the top of the hole, there's a small eyelid that catches the rain and distributes the rain to the center of the column, and we collect the rain, and we use the collected rainwater for the plants that are in the garden nearby. But because there's that little eyelid or eyebrow, it makes the light feel different depending on the angle of the sun, and it hits that ledge. And the ultimate result is that you get this attitude of dappled light, dappled meaning soft light that's both dark and light at the same time, in the same way that a tree may allow that as you sit underneath it. So what you saw just now was a natural tree. This is our artificial tree. And the light really meets the ground in the softest of ways. And people love to come and just walk through this dappled light. If it were just a gray shadow without the spots of light, people would be, I think, less interested in it. Also, because they make these beautiful sculptures, they cast light on this building, which is very historical, very restrained, a conservative building, not the kind of building we maybe would have designed, but it was what was there. And we wanted to make it better. So it wasn't our structures that make the building better, it's the shadow and light that they create that makes these buildings more interesting to people and not a prisoner of history. We also worked with a number of other artists on this project. I earlier mentioned Ellsworth Kelly. That was his last project before he died. We also had the chance to work with Carmen Herrera, who's a Cuban artist, and she made her last project before she died for this building. So we were getting nervous that, we should be careful inviting artists there. But she worked until her early hundreds. I don't remember how old she was when maybe 105, don't quote me on that, but she was over 100 years old when she died, and this was her last work, and we were so honored and privileged to work with her and integrate it into this patio that we were making. Now that it's finished, people come all the time to see this place. In the past, it had only about 2,000 people a month coming here. And now it has over 30,000 people coming here throughout the days, throughout the month. People come just to sketch these things. They have their dates there. They bring their children. You never saw a child here before. They can spend the afternoons or the weekends there. And they don't feel intimidated by the art or by these classical buildings. They feel connected. But they discover that there's a museum there, and many of them go inside, and now visitorship is wildly increased just because the public space attracted them in a meaningful way. And now there are large events there on the weekends, and it's an important place for the whole city as well as the university. The last picture of this project to show you is something that may not be unfamiliar to many of us here. It's the occupation of our public spaces by police or military. Much of this is obviously for safety, and there are very good reasons for things, but sometimes it's a challenge to our society in general. And as you probably know, in the United States, there are many difficult political challenges at the moment there. This was not too long ago when there were some protests related to the war in Gaza, and the police were sent through this garden to go to the Capitol beyond to protect it. And the reason I show this is I wonder, and I still don't know the answer, so I can't give you the answer, but I wondered what these armored people, these soldiers, thought when they walked through this incredibly beautiful moment on their way to sort of be in conflict with the same people that were in the last picture enjoying it. So I think even there's something to think about, this relationship of public space and public safety and how things interact. The next project I'll show you is a library, a public library in Calgary, which is a city in Canada, in Alberta, which is in the Rocky Mountains. It's an unusual setting. It's a very large city. It's several million people. I'm not sure of the exact size. I'm sorry. But it's a quite significant city, as you can see here. It's a commercial city with a great deal of money from finance and natural resources. And it sits at the foot or the base of the Rocky Mountains that you can see here. Spectacularly beautiful setting in the far north of America. One of the challenges with this project was that some of the earlier politicians that were looking at where to put a new library felt that libraries were maybe losing their their need. So they gave the library a location that was really difficult, that nobody else really wanted to build on, over the top of a streetcar line that ramps down into the earth, that was cutting off 2 parts of the city. We took all of those challenges and made them into the benefit of this project, to the heart of the design. And that was a big part of how we felt we could improve this area. Make it so that you could walk over the train tracks rather than under or around. And you could do that in a natural way. And if you do it in a natural way, the 2 parts of the city would grow together. And our clients were very eager to pursue this. And so they were happy when we started to generate these ideas. As you can see here in the final project, it jumps up over the streetcar or subway or metro line. And the metro rides right through the building. We couldn't move the metro. You don't do those sorts of things. Metro people get very unhappy when you move their lines. You also had a hard time building while they were running, so we had to protect the train line while we were working. But the interesting thing was that strange curve of the metro line allowed the building to follow the line of the train tracks and make it curving, a curving building. I like to say that if those train tracks weren't there, people would have put more pressure on us to make a square building, because buildings are supposed to be square. But you couldn't because the train track was there. And also, we built a terrace system that rises up over the tracks that leads you over them to the different parts of the city. On one side of the building is the cultural center, and on the other side is the residential center. It's cold in Canada, very cold at times. So people wanted us to build a pedestrian bridge up in the sky so that people could walk across the street without getting cold. But we argued against it because these types of bridges are not healthy for street life, and it's not a long way to go. So it's possible that people will survive, and they're Canadians. They're used to cold weather, so it would be okay. So we moved forward with this idea, and the clients were very happy to work with it. As we were working out the shape and the form and how it lifts up over the train tracks and brings people in a terraced system between the different parts of the city, we learned and saw that there was an unusual weather formation that occurs in the prairies and near to the tundra areas alongside the Rocky Mountains in this part of America. It occurs in a few other places, but mostly it occurs in this part of America, and it's unique to this region. It's in the tribal nations language, or the First Nations people that live there, the indigenous people. They call it a Chinook cloud, and it's a giant arch which can span many, many kilometers across. Massive. And you see it in the distance. It's heaven just arching up over this incredibly dramatic landscape. So we brought that into the story of the building because we know people were proud of these cloud formations, and so we thought they might see that in the way it jumps up over the streetcars or the metro line. And here you can see that jumping form, that Chinook cloud, which leads you to the entrance of the library and the terraces that we created to bring you naturally and comfortably over the metro line to the other side of the city. As you go up that ramp, there's a beautiful gardens that are indigenous or natural or naturalized plants there. And eventually, as you move up those ramps, you begin to see the door of the library. So the entrance is not on the street, on one side or the other. It's in the middle. And the way you access it is by these series of ramps from either side. And that's quite an interesting experience. And we created a soffit or a ceiling over this public space that is made of wood from the region. There's a lot of wood, as you can imagine, in Canada, and it comes from that region. And it's almost like a wave of wood that just comes right over your head. And people are so astonished by that moment, they'll often stop just to see what it is as they're moving back and forth between the city. From the other side, where the residential area is, you also have a glimpse of this arch. You're not immediately aware that you have to go up. It's not until you get closer and closer that you see you have to go up. And that's a trick, because if people see they have to go up from too far away, they just won't go. People like to avoid stairs. So it's a way of just bringing people naturally and nudge them into going up the stairs. Its curving form created a prow, like on a boat. And there were boats that were designed in this area by the indigenous peoples that inspired us. And it reaches up over your head, and that's where the streetcar, the metro line, goes in and out. We were greatly influenced by the tribal nations that live here. In Canada, the tribal nations or indigenous peoples are called First Nations. They're the people that lived here in these areas long before Europeans arrived. And we often find that we acknowledge, it's important to acknowledge those people. The First Nations people that we worked with here were the Blackfoot, the Métis, the Stoney Nakoda, and the Tsuut'ina people. And we involved them in our thinking, but more importantly, they wanted to be involved in the process also. So we met with them in various formats with different types of protocol. And we learned that they wanted their traditions to be useful in the project. So we created a number of spaces in the building that they can use for their own culture, for their own needs, and they had access to these places at any time in the heart of the city. We also talked to them about their arts and their culture to see if we could feel those things without copying them. You should never really copy things, but if they can impress you and allow you to think in a new way, then you should work with that. And so parts of the facade came through that discussion. Also, the facade looks a bit like a snowstorm, and when it snows, the building feels it's part of the weather. And it's made in such a way that there's solid panels where we don't want light because it's a library, and clear panels where there are reading rooms and places where light is not a problem. But rather than making just a series of windows or squares, we work them into this geometry, which almost feels like a village or a house or a snowflake, so that its scale, the scale of the building, is very hard to read since there aren't normal windows. And the shape of the building, as we mentioned earlier, as I mentioned, pulls itself from the underground structure of the metro line up into the building, and it makes this beautiful, almost like a kayak or an eye, a shape, a kayak boat, or someone's mindful eye. And that form creates a number of interesting possibilities. One of them is that in the center of this space, we wanted to bring as much natural light as we could into all of the areas, including the light from the sides. So that swarming form, that eye-like form, opens up a huge skylight at the top of a very large atrium, and it swirls around you. It just swirls. And you almost feel the energy of that swirl just pulling you up the building like a hurricane or some sort of wooden tornado. And it makes it such that you feel excited to want to use the stairs. And we also made it so that you can't see all the stairs at one time, because once again, if people can see too many stairs all at once, they get nervous and they take the elevator. And we don't want people, only those that need to use the elevator should use them, and they should have a good experience too. But those that don't need to use an elevator should use the stairs. We put lights in the handrail, and on a cold day, when you walk into the library, we made it so that those lights warm the handrail, they're metal. So people like to warm their hands on the handrail when they go up the stairs, and it collects people in a very interesting way. Here's a view of that kind of a massive spiral form. It goes up several floors. One of the things that's important about it is that when you make an atrium or a vertical space, you should not make it too vertical. If an atrium is very vertical, in other words, narrow in its aperture, narrow in its opening, the only way you can experience it is to take your body and go like this and look up. And people don't really like to do that naturally. But if it's longer, you only have to move your head. And so you move your head and you see things, and you don't stress your body always to see it. So it becomes a part of your experience. And that's one of the reasons why it's shaped the way it is. The light comes through this atrium in a very unique way throughout the year. What's wonderful is in the winter, there's snow on top of the skylight, and you receive light through the snow. In the summer, you get these massive blue sky coming through. As the sun moves throughout the day, the entire space is a clock. So it helps you sense time. And people like to come at different times to see the different qualities this atrium produces, especially on the wood of the surfaces. Surrounding the atrium are a number of unusual spaces that are for gathering or for families, for people with children or drinking coffee. Louder spaces. There are lounge spaces where you can sort of relax as if you're at home and read a book as if you're in a place that's domestic. But also there are very quiet places for research, and you discover these quiet places. Many of them are flooded with kaleidoscope light, this light that's like a kaleidoscope that's just shifting as you move through it. The bookshelves are built along the curve, and they're low enough that you can see over them, so you're never frightened what might be behind the next shelf. Libraries can be very unsafe because you don't always know who's there because of the shelves, so we made them possible to view across the entire room. We also placed at the very top of the building the quietest room of all, and you really have to work to get there. So it's loud at the bottom, and then the further you go up, the quieter and more calm it is. And people love to go up there just to sense the sort of Zen stillness that's there. Beautiful little space clad in wood, and it's very, I'd say, conventional. It's a wood room with wood chairs and tables. We're very proud of our toilets, and we'll talk about that a lot tonight. We're glad to be hosted by VitrA, who makes a lot of tile and toilet designs. We work our best to make our toilet experiences the highlights of many of our buildings. We have made some, this one in Calgary, which we designed the tile pattern ourselves. And since there's a lot of children in this library, there are colors that attract children. And many times you'll see the kids will just go in there just to see the space. I don't take a picture in this toilet, but there are others that we have. But we always feel that experiencing a toilet in a positive way can be a very good thing for everybody. And there's also a quality of this structure that allows people from different walks of life, different cultures to feel comfortable there. The colors, the view, the daylight, the access to fresh air that allows people from anywhere in the world, whether you're from India or from China or from Canada or from Turkey, you will feel a sense that you belong. And many people have called this building at home in its place, even if they hadn't used these buildings very often in the past. We worked with these First Nations people, and we were very fortunate that they agreed to dedicate the building when it opened. And that was an amazing experience, really wonderful to hear from these people. You learn about things and the world in a different way. And they enjoy talking to us and hear how we think about things. And as I mentioned earlier, one of the challenges was working with an understanding of these nations, although we were not one of them. And one of the exceptional challenges was that one of the First Nations indigenous peoples don't believe in the written word. They have never used the written word in their culture for thousands of years. But they came to this library to open it because they felt it was a home for them, even though they don't look at the written word. For me, that was a moment of you can't erase that feeling. It's just so spectacular. The next image is a film. In addition to this chieftain, a young woman came to give a dance. It's called the Bell Dance. And you'll see her dress is clad in these beautiful bells. She made the entire outfit herself. And the dance is their traditional dance that they have had for centuries. Everybody learned from each other. It was just a fantastic experience, really irreplaceable. But this wouldn't have happened if people's minds weren't open to it happening. So you need to be aware of opening your imagination to other worlds. Another project we've made, which you may have seen, was the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art expansion. It was well publicized, so perhaps you saw this, unlike some of the others. This project was an addition to a Mario Botta building, which was made, I believe, in the 90s, 1995. Yeah. And it had been doing very well, enormously successful museum in San Francisco. It changed the face of the city. And Mario Botta's work was incredibly well loved and respected. But it had had challenges over the year because it had so little glass. It was so hard to see what was inside of the building. Many people didn't realize it was a museum any longer. And we had to expand also the amount of space for showing works of art. And so we had to add to the building. We added basically to what might be called the rear or the back side of the building. And there was an administration area there and 2 alleyways that very few people ever used. So it was quite hard to make a new structure that might invite people in and provide enough transparency without changing Mario Botta's original attitude about his building and their work. So respecting it, but also allowing it to evolve to a new generation. Our expansion has been sort of bent to allow the sunlight to come in to the space between our building and the nearby buildings, and then bent back again so that it feels more open and lively and less constrained, less constricting, if it were just a straight wall at the rear here where our project was made. We were inspired by the climate, again, in San Francisco. Every place has a unique climate, and San Francisco is well known for its fog that comes through the city. I sometimes say that the fog is the busiest thing in San Francisco. Everyone else is just drinking coffee, but the fog is moving all the time back and forth. So to bring that into the picture, we thought could be an interesting idea. The building has a fog-like form, a quality of light and shadow. It also looks like a cliff against the ocean. There are many cliffs nearby against the Pacific Ocean. It's so cliff-like that actually seabirds come to this part of downtown and fly around the building and go back to the sea. They don't fly around the other tall buildings nearby, but this one seems to attract them. And it's a horizontal building, which, as you can see, many buildings are vertical in downtown areas. So it has the privilege of being horizontal. Tells you that it's something other than an office building. As you move down those alleys, which had previously been unused, you're driven to look further at this magnificent and somewhat iconic form rising between the very narrow alleyway. That space then opens up to a small garden that we created. On the picture on the right, the left side, which you see a green wall, is an 8-story parking garage with a horrible blank wall. You would never know that now because we've made that problem into an opportunity, and now it's one of the nicest spaces that we've created in the exterior. We also had to get up and over a road, so there was an access road there, so we needed to get people up one floor. Same problem as in Calgary, so we made a series of terraces and stairs that would invite you up without you being intimidated by those stairs themselves. This was Mario Botta's atrium that he designed, and we added a stair that sort of angles off to one side and angles back and lifts you up to the next floor up. And as you move, you see these beautiful works of Julie Mertu on each of the side walls. And the further you go up, you see deeper and deeper into the museum where you're able to rise up. It's a vertical museum, rise up to the galleries. As you rise up on the other side, you look down into a gallery that allows you to see large works of art like sculpture from above. And it's hard to see large sculptures from above. You're normally looking at it at eye level. This gives you the chance to see it at eye level and then to go up and look down on it. And it changes your perspective on how the work of art functions. There's a work of art embedded in the lobby walls. There's another series of stairs, very short stairs that lead you up to the green wall, that vegetated wall that you saw in the earlier picture. Once you get up to the first set of galleries, they're framed by this green wall, and there's an outdoor patio. One of the things that's wonderful about this gallery is it's where all the Alexander Calder mobiles are. And rather than using vents, air vents or fans or mechanical air systems to blow them around so they would look moving like Calder would have liked, we just made the doors, when you open them, allow enough air in, natural air, to move them naturally. So we don't use mechanical system. It's natural air of the people going in and out to the garden that help them move. And as they go outside, they're wildly attracted to this wall. It's soft and green and beautiful. And many people are intimidated by modern art. And so you have to help them feel comfortable around strange or unusual things that they might not be accustomed to. This green wall does that. It tells everyone, hey, it's going to be okay. You're going to see some art and you're going to come back and I'll be here as a green wall and you can enjoy yourself. So it's a dialogue between the challenging components of the building and the welcoming components. There's another gigantic staircase to take you all the way up. It's a very tall building. Most people would take the elevator. In the past, the building that was there, which had several gallery levels, 80% of the people took the elevators and only 20% took the stairs. With the new stair system, it's exactly the opposite. I think 85% take the stair and 15% take the elevator. So we have more people using the stair. And why is that? They're just so exciting. And San Francisco is an exciting vertical city, much like Istanbul. You move up and down the hills, and that's part of the joy of living here, and it's part of the joy of living in San Francisco. So we recreated that inside the building, and it's a sort of Instagram stair that everybody likes to take their pictures on. At the top of each stair, there's a place where you can sit and rest with a view to the outside, because you can't expect everybody to have enough energy to do all the stairs at once. So there are little seating areas that are free of art, sometimes no art, just for you to relax. As you move towards the galleries, you'll see these very unusual ceiling system, which may look like it's bringing natural light into the room, because actually the natural light, the windows are to the left of this picture. But we're not allowed to bring natural light because of curators and conservationists who work with art. So we had to recreate the light using LED and electrical fixtures. But we deliberately lined up the cove system and the light direction so it came from the same side as the windows. So most people believe that's actually natural light. And to a point, if you can't give people natural light, at least give them the feeling that they're outside. So that's a nice kind of attitude that the building presents itself. When you get to the top of the building, you're rewarded with a wonderful balcony that looks off into the city, and this is where the contemporary art is housed. And so there's more challenging works as you rise higher up in the building. One of the things I'd like to close with, and it's nice that we're here with VitrA, is we're very proud of our toilets in this building also. This building had for a long time the most Instagrammed toilet in the world, so we were happy with that. And we feel if people are comfortable enough to take their picture in a toilet, this is a good thing. The toilet itself is rather unremarkable as you approach it. It's just a white door and a white wall. You think, well, I'm going to the toilet, I'll see you in a minute. And then when you approach it, if someone's coming out, you realize, oh, there's something unusual. And when you walk inside the toilet, you're just blasted with color. You're just surrounded, immersed in color. And each floor has a different color. And the colors are taken from a sort of parametric research into the colors of the paintings and art that are on that floor. So they relate to the collections that are often shown on that floor. And you'd think that this light would make your face look weird, but it doesn't, because it's just a small amount of reflected light that creates this immersive feeling. But when you stand at the mirrors, it's a light quality that counteracts the red, so your skin looks natural. And it's quite an exciting thing, because everybody walks in and they look in the mirror and they wonder why they don't look red. But it's a kind of a sort of surprise moment. And if you go online, you'll find many pictures of that toilet. Another project we want to share with you is more about an understanding of thoughtful landscapes. We were asked to make a refurbishment of a well-known skyscraper in the middle of Manhattan, in Midtown Manhattan, which is sort of the center of much of the city. It's at 55th Street and Madison Avenue, which is a famous shopping street. Right near 42nd Street and 45th is where Times Square is. Broadway runs nearby, Fifth Avenue runs nearby, so a lot of people go here. The building itself was designed by an architect named Philip Johnson. You may have studied that architect in school. He's now deceased. It was a very iconic building and became well known around the world. It was shown on the cover of magazines when it was made in 1985. And that structure was known mostly for its top. And strangely, of course, when you're there, you can't see the top because it's too tall. You can only see it if you're in a plane or somewhere nearby in a tall building. So the building had a rather unusual quality of nobody knowing. They wanted to go see it, but they didn't know where they were there because everything they knew about it was up in the sky. The bottom of the building was very challenging. People really didn't like much about going to this building from the sidewalk. The public areas of that building were so inhuman in many ways, so uncomfortable, that they had to put signs up to say it was public space. My feeling is that any time you have to put a sign up to tell people it's public space, it's neither public nor is it really space. So there's some kind of problem there. It was dark and cold, and even the architect himself, as you see here on the right, holding a model of the building, said that the area at the base wasn't used, and it became cold and unfriendly, even though it was a powerful, iconic architectural monument. But it wasn't approachable. So we took on the task of making it human again. I sometimes like to think we're the Ghostbusters. You know, who you're going to call? Ghostbusters. We'll get it sorted out for you. The original space that he made at the backs of the building was an atrium like this that you see here, covered with a quarter circle glass roof. Over the years, it was enclosed, and they added these very unusual light fixtures. And then they took the light fixtures away and made it into a performance area with catwalks and lighting rails so you could hang lights from the ceiling and have a show. Everything failed. Nothing seemed to work. And the building itself lost its tenants. So 90% of the people in the office building left. And then all the shops that were in this walkway just slowly died. There was a famous restaurant there. The last shop to close was a small pizza parlor. And I like to say, if you're in New York City and a pizza parlor can't stay open, that's a problem because everyone eats pizza in New York, anywhere. So we started to imagine what else it could be. On the left is the original plan. There were these series of structures at the rear that were meant to be cultural spaces that nobody used. The atrium space was never used, and we thought, let's just take it apart and build on top of some of the structures in the back and create a massive garden that people could appreciate and enjoy. And we'd open up all the components of it so there was almost like an open air space. The garden that you see here at the top of the drawing on the right would not be accessible by humans. So there's no way to get into it. You can only look at it. The only things that can use it are the plants and the insects, the birds, and whatever animals might find themselves there. We don't use insecticides or things that kill insects. We don't use rat traps to kill the rats. It's a natural space, and it's self-policing in a way. It makes itself alive. It rises up over some of those structures. We had to take some down, but not all of them. And we built a new canopy over the top. The plants that are planted in this space, as you imagine, have to be very carefully selected because we're in between skyscrapers in Midtown Manhattan. There's no daylight that reaches most of these spaces. So the plants can't really survive. Ordinary plants can't survive with so little daylight. But we found along the Hudson River a series of large cliffs. And those cliffs have plants growing at their foot, at the base of these cliffs, that don't get much light at all. So they're comfortable being in a no-light situation. And so we sourced all the plants that were natural, or most of the plants, natural to that condition in this back garden. At the base, though, we began to talk about how the canopy needs to be more intimate. It was tall, and counterintuitively, we proposed to take the canopy down so that you'd feel it was a part of your experience as opposed to pretending to be far away. The space was so large, and you're in Midtown New York City, you need some intimacy. Intimacy is a luxury in a big city, as you probably know. We removed that very strange brick facade or stone facade that you see on the right. We lowered the canopy and built a softer space for people to be in. That canopy collects rainwater, runs the rainwater through the columns, and then is distributed to feed the plants that are there. Although the plants on the right side of this image are not accessible by humans, except visually, you can only look at them, the plants on the left side are entirely approachable by humans. People sit around them, they touch them, they interact with them. And those plants are a little more liberal. We replant in the year, and it's not reliant on this naturalized condition. So both areas are working with each other. We've created a series of small areas where you can sit, get you out of the loud sounds of the city. It's a Zen-like experience. The canopy allows light and view up to the side of the existing skyscrapers that are there. And you feel always that you're a part of your own unique, very natural, very special place in the middle of one of the busiest cities in the world. And people go there all year, even in the winter, to enjoy it, even on really cold days. And one of the things they do is the seat that you see on the left, which looks very anonymous, it's actually heated, so the back of the seat is warmed during the winter, and it surrounds what appears to be something like a fireplace. We don't tell anyone that the seat is warmed. So people go there and they sit down and they go, hey, wow, I'm feeling warm. This is good. I wonder why. And it's always a surprise that they feel warm there, and they come back and sit there again. It's a nice mystery for many people who don't understand it. In the creation of this project, we revitalized the area completely. We added significant amount more trees. We increased the amount of public space significantly. 42 new trees were planted, more bicycle racks. And most interestingly was there were very few public toilets there. There were 4, 2 men and 2 women. And we increased that, actually a little larger number than 7. I think maybe it's 10. It's a large number. And all the toilets are gender neutral. So they're not separated into men's and women's. You walk into a room, the stalls are private, so you can be private in your stall, but you all share the washing area with your hands. So it's an interesting move that is newer to many people in cities. We've created places for people to sit that never existed before. It's a huge change, but most importantly is the wildlife that has been brought to this part of the city. Who would have thought in the middle of New York, in the middle of 2 skyscrapers, you might see a cardinal bird or a ladybug or a dragonfly, or look in the earth and see a worm, or see flowers growing in a huge urban city, urban setting. But it happens. And it changes people's connection to their city in a very small way, but it changes their understanding of the world around them that we think is positive. Another project we just completed is a children's museum called La Nube, Spanish word we'll talk about in a moment, on the border of Mexico in a city called El Paso, Texas. El Paso rides alongside the Rio Grande River, Spanish for large river, Rio Bravo in Spanish. And the cities across the river have joined together over the years. So there are families that have heritage in both Mexico and the U.S. For centuries, there were people moving easily across the river. For decades and generations, people connected in a way that was irrelevant of the border. In a way, it's similar to the way you live in Istanbul, where the Anatolian or the Asian side and the European side are mixed with all of your heritage. But unfortunately, in recent years, they built a border that made it harder and harder for people to cross. So imagine if one day there was a border down the Bosphorus that kept you from going to see your family or every day go to work, that it would become a real challenge. Well, that's what happened here. And now children in both sides of the cities aren't able to really interact with each other in any way, and cultures are losing connections, even though they're so rich in connections. You can see in this mural that's in downtown El Paso, JRZ is the initials for Juarez. Juarez is the name of the town in Mexico, and ELP is El Paso, the name of the town in Texas. And they see these worlds as sisters living together. They never want to see them divided. And it's other people that divide them. And they have festivals and events, and over the years, children come together from time to time at different events, but it's getting harder and harder to understand those worlds. As we began working with the project, we looked at this amazing landscape surrounding El Paso. It's beautiful mountains, and we made collages. We just cut them out with scissors and just to feel these places. And we created a series of sketches, which are like doodles, sort of random sketches. And some of them were fun and happy. And we also made these dreams that you could have 2 walls, one in Mexico and one in the US, because there's a children's museum in Mexico also. And the children in Mexico could hold on to a rope, and the children in the US could hold on to a rope, and they were connected digitally. And as you pulled, you'd feel them pulling both of these ropes. It would be a fantastic way to connect them. Some of these things really didn't survive the process, but we do have other parts of the building that connect people. Now, why is it called La Nube? La Nube is a Spanish word meaning the cloud. And when we were looking at the border and understanding it, and this is a picture of one of these heavily fortified border crossings, everyone has to be checked. Everyone has to go through some security system to get from one side to the other. The only things that don't have to go through passport control are the clouds. The clouds just move every day back and forth across the border. They don't care who's down there, what police are asking them. And they cast their shadow, which everyone loves in a hot climate, a shadow, on either side of the border. So we thought it would be a great metaphor to bring to this museum. This cloud, this lovely soft thing that moves so freely across the border. It's free to do what it wishes and what it desires. So the building has a cloud-like shape. It's a very simple box, really, but the roof is whimsical or fun, I suppose is another way to say it. And children like to have fun, more so than us boring adults. So when you're designing for children, you have to release yourself from all the conventions that adults and especially architects have of what it means to make a meaningful building. Because it's for children who have different desires. They like to be energized. They like to think that they're a part of a sort of larger story that's beyond them, a sort of Superman story or something like that, or some strange cloud that they can climb in. Their imaginations are, in a way, so much grander than much of us that are adults. The strange shape also allows for an interesting section through the building so that you discover things as you move up the building and you see it in new ways and you learn new things about science and about childhood and about play. It's a wonderful place to visit now. It just opened. These are pictures before the people were in the building, so I wish we had pictures of that, because when we were there at the opening, and as it has been since, one of the most impressive things about this is there are children of all ages, between 3 and 17, all together, and usually 17-year-olds don't like to be around young people. It's embarrassing to them, but they seem to be happy there. And most importantly, none of the children or young adults had a phone in their hand. None of them were looking at their phone. None of them had a technological thing. They were all just running around and playing with each other, climbing up these strange things, getting exercise. That's a unique concept for many young people today. Exercise is almost forgotten, especially after the pandemic, being active. And they move into spaces where they learn about science and where young girls, for example, can appreciate science in a way they're not often used to in these very conservative societies that sometimes surround them. One of our architects had the idea to make math formulas on the wall to describe something that you might see and how you might calculate it using a mathematical formula. So as you're moving through, all the pieces of the building are described through a technique of science. It's colorful, it's lively. The toilets, once again, we're so proud of our toilets. We want to make a toilet book one day. But the children's toilets are like a cloud, and the corner mirror extends this cloud into infinity. And then outside the toilets, we had local artists paint these beautiful murals. These are hand painted. These are not applied. They're not computer generated. And they're just wonderful things from the desert southwest of America. And as you are outside the building, it's not a wealthy area. It's a little bit rough in this area. There are older buildings and old streetcars. You see this unusual shape. The windows are whimsical and lively, and you see people in different ways as you look through them. And at night it glows in a unique character. And on that metal, it's hard to see probably, but if you look very carefully, I'll try and point. You can see maybe there. Those are little LED lights that sparkle at night. So when you see it in the desert clear sky, the building kind of glitters. and it's also magical for younger people. It feels a bit like a house also, so children can feel good about being in a home or something domestic. But it's not looking like a house from every angle, and it has these unusual terraces that you can go onto and see the city. And that's Mexico in the back. So you see those mountains there, and that city. That city is Juarez, and the mountains belong to Mexico in the state of Jalisco. All in all, these are the two museums. That's the Children's Museum in Mexico on the right, Children's Museum in America on the left, and we hope over time it'll draw these communities closer and closer together, even if the politicians want to separate them. So that's our goal with this little children's museum. Another library that we made, we talked about one earlier, is in Toronto in Canada. If you know Toronto, it's a very big city. It's it's the biggest city in Canada, and it has a very lively commercial core. It has a great deal of money for building itself with. It's one of the wealthier cities in the country. It has an enormous, observation tower with a restaurant on top. So it has those kinds of things. Beautiful. It's on the Lake Ontario, which you can see here. People enjoy using the lake. So it has many wonderful features. It's a big city, so it has some big streets and some loud streets and a lot of kind of bright lights and advertising everywhere and all the kinds of crazy things you might see. There's one street in particular called Yonge Street, which is one of the longest streets in Canada, and it goes right past our site. And just as you go past our site, the building next door is actually, I guess you can call it an adult club. It's a place where strippers take their clothes off. And what's amazing is that that place sits there, but the facade is so amazing that even though you may not agree with what happens inside of it, you have to like the facade. So actually the city of Toronto gave this club a lot of money to preserve their facade. So it's there, and it's rather beautiful. You don't have to go inside, but you can look at this amazing thing. And that's right next to our building. So how do you compete with something like that? Very challenging. We wanted to make something that gave a liveliness to the street, but wasn't sort of Las Vegas or using a lot of electricity like the last picture that we saw. So we created a simple monolithic glass form with metal tiles that capture natural daylight in unique ways. We formed the building also like San Francisco to allow more sunlight down onto the public spaces. We modeled all the ways in which we could capture the most sunlight, which in a cold climate, it's the opposite of here where you're looking for shade. There you're looking for sunlight to warm you up on cold days. Original sketches were these crazy ceramic tile like octopus that was lifted up off the ground. It was a conceptual thought. We stayed with the thought and adjusted it to make it more realistic. And the final building we decided would not be ceramic tile. It was too heavy. So we used a lightweight aluminum structure, which was scored, or let's say, given lines, cuts by a computer. But a human being took that form and folded it into the final shape of each panel. So if you know the Japanese art of origami, that's Japanese paper folding, it's very much like that. And each of the forms has a unique impression with the surrounding light. So as you see this building in the distance, it's competing with the crazy lights of the so-called adult club on one side and all the Times Square like flashing lights, but it's doing it without any electricity, only using sunlight or at night the ambient light of all the other lights flashing that bring it to life. And I've seen people, this is another way of gauging success on a building. I've watched people get to the street intersection on their phones, because that's the way everybody is today, only looking at their phone while they're walking down the street. And they get to the crosswalk and they stop and they're still working with their phones. And then they look up to see if it's time to cross. And when they look up, they see this thing. And if you can get someone to stop looking at their phone for 20 seconds, that's a success. So I'll see people just looking at the thing and go, wow. Sometimes I'll take a picture and then go back to using their phones. But it's a way of changing our urban sensibility. People go there to play, to exercise, to enjoy this new type of plaza. Those metal panels go inside the building, extending the outdoor porch to the indoors. And there's another crazy set of stairs that take you up the building. One of the interesting things about this building is that each floor is unique in its identity, and we named each floor after a natural condition. So you have a valley, you have a mountain, you have the sun, you have a river, you have a forest, all of these things, a cliff. That's how they're defined, these floors, and they each feel like those places. So as a result, when you get in the elevator, people know those floors by their character, not by the number. So one of the elevators just has those names. You don't say, I'm going to the 6th floor. You say, I'm going to the beach. So there's no button that says number 6. It just says the beach. And you get off of it and it's the beach when you exit. Or you go to the sun, which I'll show you, and you get off the elevator and it's this wonderful warm feeling. Or you go to the sky. This is the top of the building. We call it the sky. It's the quiet space in the building. It's so meditative that students will self-police people who talk too loud. They say, if you want to talk loud, just go to the beach. You can talk loud at the beach, but don't talk loud in the sky. And it's a kind of an interesting character of that wonderful soft space at the top of the building. And as you move down, that's the sun. You walk into the sun, and it's this red, blazing light coming through the glass. Again, you would think that this light would turn everything inside artificial, but actually it's only red to you as an observer because the light inside is coming at you through a red-colored glass. As long as the light inside is stronger than the light outside, everything inside that room will be normal. So you won't feel that it's bright red when you're in there, but it gives you a kind of energy. This is the beach, and the beach is a kind of crazy place with bean bags, and people actually come to the beach with towels and beach balls and pretend they're at the beach. It's sort of called disruptive learning, where you think about being there, you study there, but it's loud and crazy. Unlike the sky, which is quiet and soft and meditative, you go between those worlds. On the beach, people do break dancing. It can get quite loud in there. We made these other parts of the building that are strange pillows that you can sit on and climb up. We had to work through the safety authorities to make that okay. But because it's soft, it works. After the building was over, we found out that 93% of the people that used it say, the students, it's an enjoyable space to work and study. They use the library more now than they ever have. They also say it's an enjoyable place to socialize. So there's a direct link between how we interact and socialize and how we educate ourselves, which is a different way of thinking libraries of the past. The last library I want to show you is a library that we made in New York City. New York City is a very big city with many, like Istanbul, many smaller areas that you might call individual communities, because the city is about 12 million people, and that includes, in addition, New Jersey. So you can live in Manhattan and never see the edge of the city unless you're going to the airport, and that's only on a freeway, and you don't really experience it. This library, as you can see in this map, is in the furthest east and southern portion of the boroughs. That boroughs mean the communities of New York City that are not Manhattan, that we all think about. It's in a place that's had terrible troubles over the years. It was originally an amazing place with amazing communities, but because politics intervened, it stopped funding these areas. It stopped helping the people that live there. They displaced a bunch of people there from other parts of the city that they didn't really care about. Call it racism. There's a number of reasons why that happened. But the place began to suffer. And during the hurricanes, this is after one of the hurricanes, I think Sandy, the place just floods. Everything floods. Everybody's houses flood, and nobody does anything about it. And so this place suffers. But they're very proud people. They love to live there, and they're not going to leave. It's their community. They built a library there in the 1900s, the early 20th century, which is a classical brick building, which was well loved by many people. But as time went by and the city was less interested in keeping these places safe and useful, the library mysteriously burned down. Nobody knew how it burned down or who burnt it down or if it was an accident, but it's clear it burned down and probably somebody was behind it. They rebuilt that library with this concrete, almost like bunker of a building with no windows, very hard to see in and out of, no light. They built a garden, but then they surrounded the garden with like a jail cell. So when you looked at the garden, it was like the garden had been committed to jail for life. You couldn't get into it. It was not approachable, and it was just mean. And so people that used this library because they had to felt disconnected from the world around them. We went there and we talked to a lot of people. This is right on the beach of the Atlantic Ocean. And we said, let's turn this building into a lighthouse, a place that makes light, that gives light to the people that live there. And that light can be absorbed in how they see their community. We wanted it to be prismatic, not using electricity, that the light came from the sun and moved through the building in unique ways that would allow you to feel and sense the sun in a different way than just sitting on the beach and putting suntan lotion on to avoid the light. So we also created an art system on the wall, which I'll talk about in a moment. But the building is just a kind of large, simple form because it needed to be somewhat inexpensive or easy or cost-effective to build because nobody really wanted to make an expensive building where so many people were suffering with a lack of income. We then started to create skylights inside that are made of these metal panels that reflect the light in unique ways. When you're inside, the light just comes into the room and just washes you in daylight. And in fact, I prefer it when they turn the electric lights off. When they have that, it's even nicer in there. And that light comes down and hits a handrail that is on the second floor of the building. And that handrail is made of a glass that has a prism in it, refracting. It takes the light and changes it into its respective colors. So normal sunlight is made of many colors, and it shows you all of those colors as the daylight passes through the handrail. And as the sun moves, it's changing like a kaleidoscope, like a game. And when you're above and you look down, it's always changing. It's just constantly alive. And that gives you the feeling that you're alive too. And as you look through it, the colors that you see change all the time. So it's a kind of energizing feature. One of the things that's amazing that we didn't quite understand in the beginning was that as the light passes through these handrails, it makes strange reflections or patterns of light on the floor. And as you enter the library during the day, some people go there just to see. It's only there for maybe an hour or so during certain times of year, and they move when the sun moves, and then they disappear altogether until the next day. So it's a sort of lively place. Children also love this place. It's a public library, so to get children to come here and feel proud of the community they live in gives a sense of hope for these people that have been ignored for so many years. We worked with a Cuban-American artist named Jose Parla. He has lived in New York City and lives in Brooklyn today. He's lived in the Bronx. He's lived in Miami and lived in Puerto Rico, and his family came from Cuba. And he works with this idea, which you're obviously familiar with here, writing on walls. Some people call it graffiti. We don't call it that because it's a work of art, of writing. They're writing stories and narratives and messages. And the writing is about the layers of the wall, the layers of history of which you have so much here in Istanbul. And these are some of his works that are built onto walls or into buildings. So he created this very small drawing that was going to become the entire wall of the library. He had to draw it small because he can't work as big as a building. And we enlarged it over a long period of time using a great deal of effort so that it would become the facade of the building. And you feel his movements as he creates the writing on this wall. And as you approach it, it gets clearer and clearer. It's a massive representation of the culture of these communities who are often used to writing on walls or creating works of art in the public spaces that they live around. So it's a rather exceptional character. When you look through it, it's not it's transparent. It's not solid. So you can look through it to the outside as well as see it solid from outside looking in. At times when the sun hits it a particular way, it becomes a work of art, very dynamic, very reminiscent of the cultures that live in the area. The colors are quite unique. They come from the sunrise over the ocean, and you know here in Turkey, the sunrise colors are different when you're near the water than when you're inland. So we wanted to bring those colors to life. This is a view of the panels on the exterior that change also with the movement of the sun. And it's created a cultural renaissance for the people that live there from all over. They're from Africa, they're from China, they're from the U.S., all these places come together to recognize the power of this new library they're so proud of. When we made the project, everybody said, oh, somebody's going to shoot it, because there's a very high murder rate in the area. And everyone said it won't last. And we said, no, if people love something, they will protect it. And so it's had no challenges yet to its character. And people protect it with their own understanding of what it can be for their community. It's allowed people to get money to build better housing for themselves and these kinds of things. So it's been an interesting process. The last project I'm going to show you is the Theodore Roosevelt Presidential Library. I'll move through it rather quickly. It's a presidential library, which is a library for artifacts and papers of presidents. And you probably know Theodore Roosevelt. You maybe have heard the term Teddy Roosevelt. It's where the teddy bear comes from that you see in toy stores. It came from a nickname that he received. He was one of the great presidents in the United States back in the early 20th century. He introduced a lot of important things, but one of the things that was important was that he ended up in a place which we call the Badlands of North Dakota. It's a place you might only see in a movie, like a Western or something. These fabulous cliffs and valleys that just draw you in by their color, similar to landscapes you would have in Turkey. Certainly as you go to certain parts of Turkey, you'll find something like this, but they're less common in the U.S. What you may not know about Theodore Roosevelt was that as a young person, he was very weak, he was sick, he nearly died many times. So he was not the Teddy Roosevelt, the big burly man that you saw in the first picture. He was constantly on the edge of not surviving because of different sicknesses. He eventually was taken care of by his mother, who kept him alive. His mother gave him a new chance to live. And then he met his wife, and his wife also helped nurse him to health. These two women were enormously important to him. He knew that without them, he might not succeed. And then on one day, the same day, Valentine's Day, on 1884, both of these women died on the same day of two separate diseases. So you can imagine how horrifying it was for him. And he wrote this in his diary, "The light has gone out of my life." And he sat destitute for weeks and months until his friends told him, you have to break the spell. We know they were important to you, but you have to live your life. They gave you a life to live, not to seclude yourself in sorrow. So they put him on a train, and he went out to western North Dakota, which is the middle of nowhere, to the Badlands. And he created the person we know of today as Teddy Roosevelt or Theodore Roosevelt. He became a cowboy. He learned how to live off the land. He learned how the people that lived there, the indigenous peoples, lived. And he started to create his theories about protecting the land, which was under attack at the time. If you know the story of the American West, the buffalo, these big cow-like creatures, were being shot until they were nearly extinct. The grasslands were being taken away. He saw that and he said, I have to do something about this. So he created his first thoughts about conservation, and that's why we want to create, one of the reasons we want to create a library in his honor, even though he's dead. Presidential libraries today are never made for deceased presidents. They're usually for living presidents, and they hold their papers. It is interesting to work for a deceased president. They generally don't have a lot of criticism against your design. But we work with all the living family, family of Theodore Roosevelt. There are now several Roosevelts living today that we interact with about this design. But you have to ask yourself, why do we need a presidential library? What is it? What should it be? Why do we need one? Well, the answer may surprise you in our understanding. It's because in this place, it's about grass. A presidential library is going to be about grass, which is a strange thing to say. You would never think that would be a natural answer for a world leader's presidential character. But the grass is very important here, and he knew that. So when he was alive, he was looking at how to protect the earth, and he built the first government legislation that conserved natural landscapes. It is the first modern public national park that was ever created, was created by efforts that he put in place. So any national park anywhere in the world traces its roots back to this legislation that he created, and much of the rest of the world either adapted or copied. So that's an important feature to recognize to get to understand how he understood that landscape. I decided personally to just do what he did. I just set off on my own and walked across the landscape. It's hard to walk across the Badlands. They're not called the Badlands for any silly reason. They are bad and they're difficult to walk across. There's no water. It's dangerous. There are snakes. There's angry buffalo. There's angry horses. There's, eagles and things. It's not an easy place. And so I moved across this for several days and just felt what this meant. That immersion in that place gave us an understanding. We also had some of our other team move across other parts of the landscape, and we began to learn about the natural grasses and the natural landscape that existed here. This is our landscape architect, Michelle Delk, talking about her understanding of the landscape, which is always different than an architect's understanding. So we learned from those discussions on site. Everyone took these kinds of walks. Also, Theodore Roosevelt was an incredible reader of books. He read thousands of books in his lifetime, more than anyone could possibly imagine. So we decided that the landscape can be a library. A presidential library could be the actual landscape that you would first learn about his life and his beliefs from. And that landscape would give us ideas about what needed to be there. We picked up rocks and we took the rocks back to our studio. We made these silly models that were just for fun, just getting to hold the rocks in our hand. And one day we found 2 rocks, picked them up. They were near a riverbed. They were smoother than most rocks there. And then a few steps away, there was a leaf that fell from a tree. Just randomly picked it up. Don't know why. There was no real reason to pick these things up, but we did. And when we put them together, the 2 rocks and the leaf, they made this concept for a building. The 2 rocks were the 2 different functional parts of the library, and the leaf held them together and protected you from the climate. And also that shape would be similar to the silhouettes of the landscape that you saw all around you, a kind of wonderful moment where the landscape comes to you. This was the site when we arrived, and we thought, this is beautiful, and the original site for this library was right dead in the center of this picture. And we said, why would we want to ruin all of this, no matter how great the building is? I don't care if it's the most beautiful building in the world. You cannot replace the landscape that you're taking away from people's ideas. So we moved the site from that circle area in the middle of everything off to the side, where you actually couldn't even see it immediately. And many of the wealthy people that were donating to this wondered why we would do that. They're spending money on something. They want you to see it right away. And then we told them it's the surprise that will be as powerful as seeing it immediately. You always enjoy discovering something more so than seeing it and then trying to understand it too quickly. So this is the building as it rises slowly above these prairie grasslands. It's a soft roof that you can walk on top of and see the Badlands. There's a boardwalk that surrounds the prairies that are there. And as it reaches to the edge of the bluff, it peers over the edge so that when you walk up from the valley below, you can see it just in the distance, just a little bit of it, but not enough to understand what it is. The boardwalk surrounds a huge area of grassland, which you saw in that picture before. But that grassland that you saw is not natural. It's all made artificially. But the walkway was important to us to get you to try and see what we were going to do with it. So the walkway stays flat, but the earth always moves. But since you're walking flat, sometimes you're below the ground and sometimes you're above it. Sometimes you're at level with the earth, and that connects you to the topography. We made an actual path on the site to test it. So we went out there and actually stamped the grass down to make the shape and walked around and tried to better understand it. And then we started to talk about where it is in America. These are the great prairies of the American West, massive oceans of grass. These are grasses that extended thousands of kilometers from the south to the north. And when the indigenous people lived there, this was their ocean. And these grasses were the water that they lived with. And now we've taken those grasslands away and replaced them with farmland for various reasons. One thing we discovered was that if you think about the grasses in a new way, you could convince the ranchers, the people that raise cattle there, that they could use native grass to feed their cows. The grasses would be free because they're native. You don't have to buy them from an industrial seed supplier. And the grasses that used to grow there are healthier for the cow, so they live longer. They produce less methane, which is the gas that's very bad for the environment. And they're easier to manage. You don't have to irrigate them or clear them out. And that would be a carbon issue, because a prairie grass is different than the grass that's in your front yard. A prairie grass has deep roots, very deep roots. And as the grasses grow, they accept carbon dioxide from the air, and they take that carbon dioxide, they turn it into oxygen, but all the carbon dioxide goes into their roots and deep into the earth. You can sequester over 1 billion tons of carbon dioxide just by planting enough prairie grasses to restore these places to what they were. So when we talk about being kind to the environment, we shouldn't only focus on materials and energy. Think about the life that needs to be there, because they can do as good a job as we can just making sure we use wood instead of steel or things like that. Those other things are extremely important. You should never discredit them. But we have to go beyond that. And biodiversity and habitat is very important in understanding carbon connections. Why did this grass go away, actually, you might ask yourself? Well, like much of the world, only about 10, 20, 30,000 years ago, our continents, even this continent where Turkey, 2 continents where Turkey exists, were filled with gigantic animals, huge animals, and that's what you find in the fossil record. You had horses the sizes of giraffes, and tigers the size of horses, and massive, massive creatures. And they treated the soil in a different way than domestic cattle do. They were much larger. They ate a lot more. So they ate up most of the grasses, but then their I guess, excrement, their feces, their shit, for lack of a better term, also gave fertilizer to the ground, and the grasses grew back quickly, and grass goes very quick. So it was a natural cycle that existed until humans came, ate up all those creatures. They're gone now. And the only thing we have left are the remnants of these fantastically big animals, and those are things like cows and maybe buffalo. Well, they don't treat the soil in the same way as one of these large animals, and as a result, the grasses get dry and they burn. So a grass fire burns fast. So one of the problems is that you're always going to have fires when you use colonial grass. There's always a danger of a fire. How do you change that problem? Well, one of the things that you do is you look at the grasses and you say, we need to have a controlled fire. You probably know that word. Where you take an area and you burn just that area to remove all the old fuel that starts the fires, and then we can replant it with natural grasses. Well, we brought that idea to the community, and you can imagine they were very scared. No, we don't want you burning the top of our hill over here because it's going to reach down and burn my house. And I understood the fear, but it was scientific process, so it wouldn't cause them any trouble. But everyone had a vote, and they voted not to do the burn. And we were kind of stuck. So we were wondering what to do. And some weeks later, by the grace of God, a bolt of lightning struck just our site, came down from the sky, and caught the entire site on fire. And it was amazing. And after that happened, everyone thought we had a straight line to God or something. And it just cleared all the fuel that was there, and we were able to start replanting with natural grasses. And the fire did not spread. Nobody was hurt. There was very little damage. It was scary, but it was well controlled. And so that moment we understood that things could change. So this fire was intense. This is the site. Our building was to go right on where all those fires are. And fortunately, it was put out quickly. Then all the burned remnants were there. And then as soon as the burning stopped, after 2 or 3 rains and a little bit of a help, the grasses, and then many of them were the natural grasses, grew back almost immediately, because plants love fire. They grow very quickly when it happens. We started to look at the seeds, and we decided the best way to replant these fields was to collect natural native seeds from the plants that grow around the site. And so we began a campaign called the Seed Collection Project, where we worked together with the local university and people that live in this region to help us collect natural seeds. So we showed them what types of seeds and plants to collect and which ones to avoid. And everybody went out in these kind of parade of people collecting seeds, and they felt ownership over the process, which connected them to this change that although they may understand climate change, they don't really understand it always as some professionals do. And so they just felt good about collecting these seeds, and they connected to the scientific challenge of climate change through this process. The seeds were cataloged. They were taken to the university. They were dried. They were cleaned. They were made to grow, and those seeds then were taken to the site and replanted. So we have revitalized this ancient prairie that existed for hundreds of thousands of years. Only until the last 200 years did it disappear. We made this crazy calendar, which I would love for everyone to look at and remember. It's a circular calendar, so at the top is December, and each little triangular pie, like a pizza pie, is a different month. And if you draw a line from the center of this circle out to the edge to a certain date, say the 21st of February, you can see this is January, December, January, February. That's roughly the 21st of February. Everything that it cuts through is what's happening on that day. So it may be natural things like a bird that's having a mating season, or it may be human-made things like they're having an expo or a seminar about government. And what you do is you look at all those concentric circles and you see if there's a conflict. If there's a very big festival planned on the site, at the same time several animals are having their mating season, you have to slide those calendar pieces around so you don't interfere. So it helps you make an organic living calendar that allows humans and wildlife to coexist. It's a very useful tool that we like. And anywhere you draw that line is a different condition at a different time of year. And on the outside of the circle is what the site looks like at that time of year and what animals you might see. We worked with the indigenous First Nations people here. There's a number of very important tribes. There are the 3 federated or formal tribes that work together, the Mandan, the Hidatsa, and the Akira. They have provided an enormous amount of insight for us. We learned what they needed so that our goals should be in line with their goals. And one of the most important things they wanted was to make a way that this building would send people to their lands where they lived so that their economy could flourish. So it wouldn't just be our economy, our making money. The people that go to these other places would spend money where they are, either buying their crafts and other things. They also said very many funny things like, well, we would never make a building for one person. We don't even understand that concept. Our culture is about culture. It's about all of our people. It's not about one person or another. And so that was an interesting conversation that made us think twice about what we were doing. But another thing they taught us, which was wonderful, and I share this with you because it's quite fascinating. In many of these cultures, they have a compass. They have a north, a south, and an east and a west. They understand that because it's the stars and the sun that make those directions for everybody. Wherever you are in the world, you understand north, south, east, and west. But they have 2 additional dimensions, up and down. So in addition to north, south, east, and west, through the middle is an up and a down. And they see those as directions on a compass. And they feel differently about each one of those directions, and they talk to us about it. And it inspired us to make this stargazing area built into the earth, which we're now starting to understand how we'll construct it. But you lean back, it's in the ground, so you're not above the ground. And as you lie back, you see the stars in the sky. There's no light pollution there. So you get the massiveness of the sky. And in the middle is this circle, which is a highly polished stone. It's so polished that when you look into it, it reflects the sky above. So you're looking into the earth at the sky above your head. So it builds that spiritual kind of sense that we learned from these people. And although this rendering shows light coming out of the glass, that was only done so we could win the competition. We didn't really want light there. So it's actually almost no light leaks the building. You needed to do this so that people could see the building, but it would be very, very dark. So there's very little light pollution. We were talking about that earlier in Istanbul, the challenge of light pollution. There's so much light, it's getting harder and harder to see the sky. So we're careful to protect these places. We have places for people to ride a horse, to walk, to move into the landscape, move through an outdoor space as they enter the library itself. This is a covered porch that protects you from the snow in the cold winters. As you move inside, there are these earth walls, and the earth that made these walls is the actual site area where our building exists. So the areas around our building, we collected the soil from those places and brought them here and made this wall out of that. So when you touch them, you're touching the earth that you're occupying. And the final picture here is just to say that even though the project is still under construction, people have started, these pictures are not real, they're pictures from the site generally, but people are telling us already they're seeing things starting to come back to this place. And so we suspect once it's completed in 2026, a whole new world of life will be existing there that hadn't existed for thousands of years. I want to stop, but before I stop, I'll just give you a quick run through of what's on our tables or what we just finished. We recently finished an art museum in Nebraska in the center of the United States, Contemporary Art Museum. We finished a cultural center in a small town in Iowa. Just about 3,000 people live there. They're so proud that they have a piece of modern architecture in their little community. It's a wonderful feeling. When you're in a small town and you do work, your picture gets around. So when you walk down the street as the architect, everybody waves at you. It's kind of amazing. Nice feeling. Good for the ego. Then this is a library in Philadelphia that we finished a few years ago. I see it on a few pictures. Wonderfully sculptural, and it holds you in a very soft way. A symphony orchestra that we're building in St. Louis. It's going to be finished in about a year and a half, so it's under construction now. We're making an art center in New Hampshire at Dartmouth College. It's nearly done. It'll open in a few months. So this is a rendering, but soon you'll see pictures of it. We're also building another library in North Carolina, which is very exciting and dynamic for this part of the southeastern U.S. Unbelievably, we are in charge of the entire redesign of the Ford Engineering and Design Campus in Michigan, where Ford Motor Cars began. A massive project that will take generations to finish. And one of the big moves that we made here was got the Ford Motor Company to be in a smaller space so that all the space left over could be turned into habitat for biodiversity purposes and bring the general public in. It's rather spectacular. We're finishing the first stage in about 2 years, and there are 2 more phases that may happen. A small and very unusual free project for a center in Zimbabwe that is helping young women and women who operate this mine to have some independence and a place where they can bring their children while they work in these places in the fields near the center of Zimbabwe. And the last picture here is a natural science museum we're building in Mexico. It's about 50% complete, so we suspect maybe in 2 years it should be open. And I love these views from the courtyards, looking at a very spiritual place, Mexico. And the last project, the very last project, is our company, Snøhetta, who obviously all of those people that work in all those studios contribute so much to these buildings. And it is, in a very real way, our most complicated project. One of our directors and our managing partner from New York is here, Elaine Molinar. She runs our studio in New York, and so we're happy that she's here. And there are many others who wish they could be here. And so I acknowledge all their power and expertise. So thank you very much for your time. I might have gone on a little too long.
Yeah, well done. Thanks a lot for this great speech, Craig. It was a pleasure to host you tonight. So please stay on stage with me for the Q&A session. Değerli konuklar, bu güzel konuşma için Craig Dykers'a çok teşekkür ederiz. Bugünkü programı soru-cevap bölümüyle tamamlayacağız. Eğer sorularınız varsa arkadaşlarımız sizlere mikrofon uzatabilirler. Şöyle bir bakayım. Türkçe ya da İngilizce sorabilirsiniz sorunuzu. Fark etmez çünkü Craig'in kulağında da aslında tercüme olacak.
Hey everybody, don't be afraid.
Sol tarafta bir tane soru var. Nerede? Merhaba.
Hi Craig. Thank you for coming to Istanbul and giving a presentation of the wonderful projects that Snøhetta is doing. As a recent graduate, I'm a little concerned of some practices in Turkey and around the world who are engaging in greenwashing to promote LED, like their LED structures. But some of these buildings actually spend more energy than buildings without LEED certification.
Yes.
So I'm wondering, what are your thoughts on the effectiveness of these like sustainable building system ratings and maybe the ways we could improve them? Yeah, thank you.
Well, clearly there are going to be problems with commerce or money when it's related to, sorry, I'm hearing myself here, when it's related to how we spend money and environmental issues where money becomes very challenging. We at least need to respect the idea that somebody's trying something, and it may not be perfect. And as I like to say, the perfect can be the enemy of the good. So while they may be causing challenges, they are also at least moving a little bit forward. And so we must be careful not to demand that every solution be perfect. We should strive for better solutions. But we need to be careful not to just criticize everything if it's not perfect. You have to realize that in some cases, the money is such a challenge that it's hard to balance these worlds. We need to find better ways to tell clients, people in commerce, how they can actually have a return on their investment by being intelligent from an environmental perspective. Those natural grasses in North Dakota, when we first talked about it, everybody thought we were crazy. But when we told them they could save money, they could improve their product, and by the way, it's also good for the atmosphere and for our world, it was more natural. And, you have to respect those other challenges even if there are many problems. Best thing to do is come up with constructive opposition, not destructive opposition.
Okay, we have another question. Again there, Melis. I recognize the
Hello, thank you. I would like to start thanking to VitrA and RIBA for this event, and thank you, Craig, for your time. Very inspiring presentation. So as a practicing architect, I've always been impressed by the idea of yours, idea of integrating this interdisciplinary approach to a design collector. I think we have seen very good examples in the Queen's Public Library project and in the Presidential Library, where you carried out such a huge process with different disciplines. So I'm curious if you can give more examples about this interdisciplinary approach where this becomes visible maybe among the projects you have shared with us today. So thank you.
Thank you. I would say it's important, but don't get the idea that it's easy. It's not easy. It looks easy, and we're all friends here, and so we talk about how positive things are and how we enjoy it, and we do. But it takes a lot of effort and a lot of work. And no matter how creative you all work together, how creative that process is, you're always going to find differences. So we work hard to ensure that those differences can somehow be managed in a useful way. We argue sometimes. It's not like we're all sitting around being all the time super friendly. But when we argue, we try to respect each other in a certain way so that we know that it's just passion as opposed to anger. And I don't know if that answers your question. Other projects, in nearly every project we have, you can tie through some of these thoughts that were mentioned tonight, and others.
Okay. Craig, we have another question from the side.
Firstly, thank you so much for coming here and giving us this spectacular speech. I'm an architecture student in the first grade, and my question is, what advice would you give to us young architects?
Oh, well, I'm too old to give young advice. But I would say there are many things that are important in this world today. There's a lot of conflict. There's a lot of fear. There's a lot of anxiety. There's death all around us. Death that we shouldn't have. There's groups that want to separate people, to make them feel they're not the same at all, which creates a negative environment. So I think you shouldn't be afraid of all those things. I think you should just understand that there are important and powerful forces in the world, but any little thing you can do can make a difference that will change. And you shouldn't be pushed to the point that you feel you need to save the whole world on your next project at school. Because you'll never save the whole world. I hate to say it, that as hard as we work, we are not going to save the world. We only save parts of the world, a little at a time. And if you focus on those successes, those smaller successes, they all add up. So if each one of us has a small success, when you have everyone having a small success, it makes a big success. So that's one thing to think about. The other thing I would say, my perspective as an architecture student, when I was a student, I wanted to learn about everything other than architecture. I wanted to learn about music, I wanted to learn about history, literature. Elaine was dancing, just any kind of thing that was not about making a building. Because all of those things they feed how good your buildings can be. Because the more you understand about the world, the more your design will be connected to the rest of the world. Just like an author who writes a great book, that book is some character of that author's connection to his history or her history that makes this story relevant to all of us. And the same can be true for architecture. So don't shut yourself off in the studio and think that just because you know how to make a model, you're going to make great architecture. Although that's pretty good stuff too.
So we have another question up left. Yeah. Please.
Hello.
Hello.
Thank you for coming to Istanbul and giving this smooth presentation. And I have a question about your design intention. And first of all, at the beginning of your presentation, you showed the word saying living buildings. So as human beings, buildings could fade away or could die. So do you make or do you construct your buildings to deconstruct in the future?
I think I understood your question. It was about the time that a building exists, correct? So a building does live. It has a life. And everything that goes into that building that made it also had a life. So if you're making a building out of wood, that wood came from a tree. That tree had a life. It gave up its wood for our use. It's a privilege that we have trees that let us use their wood. So you have to be grateful for that. And if it's concrete or stone, that all came from somewhere. Its life already started long before we started to think about a design. The tree was growing for decades. The stone has been there for thousands of years. All of those things. And then as we take those things and use them and manipulate them to make design, whether it's landscape architecture or building architecture, we have to recognize that even that has a life. And if we can appreciate its life, we should not expect that it should stay the same for eternity. At some point, it might, in quotes, die or stop being used as a building. But if you make it such that it can be reconfigured or reused or used for something else, then it has a longer life. And so it may not be the same building, but its pieces might be used in other buildings. Another thing is that in terms of the lifespan of a building, we should look more often at reusing older buildings. It's sort of a joke, but it's true, that if we really want to make an impact on climate change, we should just stop building buildings. Like all of the architects in the room just put their pencils down and stop making new buildings. But what we can do, and where architects can be helpful in this question, is to look at older buildings and convince the people that those buildings have a future life, even if they're not made for our uses today, and come up with exciting and interesting new ways to use older buildings. You win twice. First, you get an amazing old building, and second, you get to give it life. So that's a double win. I think we need to think a little differently like that. Sometimes you can't always keep an old building, so there are always going to be new buildings. I know I'm being extreme, But the reality is we could save and reuse a lot more older buildings. And Istanbul is filled with beautiful older buildings that should not be torn down.
Yeah, thank you.
We have another one from left-hand side on the second row.
Hey, hi.
Hi, Mr. Dykers. It is a pleasure to listen to your project from your library. I am actually a civil engineer. I did a second type of old building at the heart of Istanbul. It's our first architect, Kemalettin. From the pictures of 19th century, we reconstruct the mansion. I guess architects are like doctors because they affect our health of soul.
Yes.
So my question is, I wonder how AI will affect the design process and design influence. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, this is the question. If I had €1 or 100 Turkish lira for every time someone asked me about AI in the past few weeks, I would be a wealthy person because it's the most kind of common question about our profession. There are several ways to answer that. One of them is that AI is a tool, like any other tool, and you have to treat it like a tool. In our lifetime, in my lifetime, I've seen so many different tools used. When I began my career, it was mainly pencils, and then there were pens, nice technical pens. And everyone thought that was going to change everything. And, well, what do you think about technical pens? And, drafting on these things. And then computers didn't exist for us. They existed, but only in the highest level of academia, usually scientists. So we had no access to computers, didn't know how they worked. Some engineers did, but very few others did. And then slowly we began to see the computer come in and all the different programs. We're old enough that we learned a lot of the early programs, but unfortunately when you get older, you learn so many programs and they go obsolete almost immediately, and you're so tired of learning new programs, that you just stop. So AI is a little more accessible than some of the programs, so it's easier to use. But my warning is that even though AI is incredibly helpful, and it will be a helpful tool, just like pens were, or AutoCAD, or these computer-aided drafting technologies, we should not let technology manage our lives. You have to, as a human, manage the technology that you create. If technology manages us, we lose our humanity. If we manage technology, we give it the gift of humanity. And that's the important difference we need to create for ourselves. Also, people think that artificial intelligence is, because the word intelligence is in there, that it's some sort of utopian solution. But it's not. It's just another tool. And if you look at it that way and understand how it works, you would never pick up a technical pen and just say, well, it's a pen, I'll just draw. You need to understand how it works so that you can draw with it the right way. Same with artificial intelligence. So the biggest issue for me is that people think artificial intelligence provides answers for questions we don't even need to ask. And that's wrong. I started off the presentation with questions. You need to know the right question to ask the technology. Otherwise, you're not going to get an answer that's helpful. Or it's random throwing of the dice, hoping you get something useful. So keep all of those things in mind as you use it. It's not going away unless electricity goes away, which could happen at any time. So, there are things that may keep it from being successful. But always try to manage it. Don't let it manage you, because we have the gift of imperfection, right? We are irrational creatures who make mistakes. And the more artificial intelligence keeps being developed to be a perfect creature, it cannot evolve in the same way we can allow it to evolve. But at least we're aware of how we're allowing it to evolve. I could go on all night, I suppose, but I'll stop there.
Great. We have 3 more questions already, and one from the first row.
You can speak Turkish as well. I have a worm in my ear.
Hey, I'm going to speak in English.
Okay.
I realize that the common characteristic of most of your buildings, especially public buildings, is that they are very gentle in their approach to the locals, to the indigenous people, for example. And I was curious about how do you approach this, if I may call it the participatory process or the community involvement process. And my question is that how do you organize this process? And it is not only about the people, not only about the human users, but also the
natural conditions.
Natural conditions also. At which stage of your designs you consider the users, the locals? And who are the stakeholders? How are you able to facilitate the users in the design process? How do you organize this as an architectural?
It's a great question. It's a gigantic question and very, very important. So it's going to be hard to give you a simple answer. But one thing I can say is that like everything else, it's not perfect. But you try to get things moving as quickly as possible. Because it's not really engagement if the project's over and you ask for people's thoughts, which happens a lot. So the earlier, the better. Also, you need to use different methods. There's no one method. There are many, many methods to get people to talk to each other. It used to be thought, well, you're going to design a public building, so you bring a bunch of people into a room, you show them a picture of the building, and you ask them what they think about it. And that immediately sets up a very negative, antagonistic character. People just immediately say no, because they've been told what they're going to get, and they're sitting in this position much lower. I'm up here, you're down there. Everything about it doesn't want to create cooperation or positive understanding. So you have to break up the hierarchy. You need to take yourself down to the level and talk to people on their terms, learn their languages, learn what's important to them just by talking. Very importantly, your language needs to be approachable. And we're taught in architecture school to invent words that nobody can understand except for architects. It's like crazy. I don't even think the architects understand. I went to a review at Princeton University once, and the students were supposed to put their work on the wall before, you gave the review. So early in the morning you could go and look at them all before students came, and each one of them had a one-page description. And I couldn't understand any of them. And I had to take pictures of them and send them back to the studio because there were some other people. Can someone please tell me what this means? So if I can't understand, you can imagine what the rest of the world thinks. So coming up with a common language that feels that it connects people also helps. I'm lucky because I've lived all over the world most of my life. So even though English is my first language, I try to speak in a way that's accessible. And that helps. And in an audience like this, where everyone is Turkish speaking as a first language, it's very important. But it's not even separate languages. I can be speaking English to English speakers, and nobody understands each other. So it's finding out that connection. And then finally, sometimes it helps to embarrass yourself. Embarrassing yourself is a big gesture to show that you're vulnerable. And so I have gone to places, or we have gone to places, where we just walk down the street and stop people and say, hey, I'm an architect. I'm going to build a library here, over there. What do you think about that? 60% of the people just run away from you because they think you're crazy or you're going to steal their money. And the other 40%, half of them sort of barely answer or don't say much and then walk away. But the other 20% will talk to you very deeply, and you learn a lot from what they're saying because they feel that because you put yourself in this vulnerable position on a street where you know that people are not going to be easily comfortable, allows them to open up to you. So we learn things that way. Getting on the street, very important. It's not about organizing a meeting. Just walk down the street and see what's going on. And anytime somebody tells you that nothing's happening on that empty lot, they're wrong. Something happens everywhere, even if it's a dog using it for them going to the toilet. But somebody uses it. There's no place anywhere that really exists that is not in use in some way. Learn those uses. Okay?
We have another question over there.
Sorry, we've been talking about...
Yeah.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm Arda Karaatlı. You started your presentation with Alexandra Library, which was also almost like 50 years ago. And that reminds me an article that I read today, which was saying which about Kodak, the photography company, how it collapsed unexpectedly. And a century ago, 60 years of a lifespan of a company was a success. And in 80s, it was like 30 years. Decades ago, it was like 20 years. And nowadays, 10 years of a lifespan of a company was a success. And we are entering an environment, a catastrophic environment, which no one exactly knows what's coming. And I wonder if Snøhetta has a strategy for this unknown environment.
When you say companies last for 30 or 10 years, do you mean architecture companies or any kind of company?
No, any kind of big operations.
I see. Well, I'll answer your comment in a couple of ways. First of all, just because a company only lasts 10 years doesn't mean it's a failure. Maybe it's a good thing. Maybe in 10 years it did what it needed to do and then it recombined into something else and that was useful. I mean, if it fails because people had hoped it would last longer and they had more and they couldn't succeed, then yes, it's a failure. But time shouldn't be the indicator. It should be what those companies do or have done. The second thing is, I would say, you mentioned that we don't know what's going to happen in the future. Well, I'm afraid to say we do know what's going to happen. It's going to get worse before it gets better. There's going to be a lot of tragic conditions around the world, whether they're politically or related to speeding up of climate change. So we need to just accept that our part is not to say, oh, everything will be somehow better if we look at it better. We can only make change in ways that are valuable to us that we can succeed in. Success can be, as I mentioned earlier, in smaller things as well as larger things. Now, there are people out there who make huge steps forward, and they're important. I would argue that most of those people are not architects. They're probably scientists or engineers or people that see the world through practical lens. We see the world through impractical lens. That's part of our gift often. But we can try. So I would say just looking at those failures tells us how we can at least make limited improvements or even big improvements over time in the future. Don't get swallowed up by all of these big problems. Yeah.
Okay, so the last two questions.
All right.
Thank you.
Hi.
I'm Melis. Thank you for coming here, and it's so exciting, amazing to hear you and see all this project. My question is about the urban scale, actually, because as an architect, we sometimes focus on the building, just building, and forgot environment or the city and urban space, maybe even in the urban, even the project area scale. And so how you approach to the urban scale and all these design together with building and city lifestyle?
Sure. Well, one thing that's interesting is if a city, if you connect deeply to a city, you don't feel it's different from your home. The city is your home. And so sometimes in those kinds of places you need to think about it differently than making a new city, say, a brand new city. Where you don't have a home or any connection there and you have to build that into the design. But you're right, urban scale is very difficult for most people to deal with. The impact and the consequences of each decision changes the lives of many, many people. But I would say ultimately an urban space is simply driven by human needs, and break down the problems into smaller and smaller problems. And the smaller the problem gets, the easier it is to drive or move the problem into a better location or better space. So breaking down things is helpful. Another one is, as I mentioned earlier, our work tends to connect to natural conditions. Daylight, fresh air, sustenance, food, all of these things are things we all need. And social conditions. No matter how bad the pandemic was and how many months you spent locked away in your apartment, here we are now. We need social space. We need social conditions. So if you can infuse your thinking with those attitudes and learn how those things can make a difference and what constructive methods are available to make for positive change, you can add that to the technical challenges that urbanism requires. Because urbanism is at its very foundation a technical challenge. We can talk about exciting things all day, but if we can't manage water, or we can't manage density, or we can't manage normal sort of needs, electricity or whatever it is to get light, how we manage trash, all of those things, those are the technical problems that we need to focus on. But if we only focus on those things, the result will be very dry and very unappealing, too scientific, too predictable. We need to add the intuition component that makes us think we live and love the places we live in. So I don't know if that answers your question, but it is different, you're right. Urbanism is different in many ways, but similar in other ways. It's like your home, but it's also bigger than your home. I mean, I was joking when I was in school, there was somebody I knew who lived in New York. This was years ago. And I asked him how big his apartment was, and it was this, New York apartment. He could I don't think it had a bed. It just had like a space for a stove, and he slept on the floor or whatever. And I said, how do you live like that? It's just so small. And he said, well, I don't eat dinner at home. I never cook in my kitchen. I go out to the cafe, and I meet my friends, and we eat out. So his dining room was all these different cafes all over the city. And I said, well, what about entertainment, or what do you do? Well, he goes to a movie or to a play, does all those things. So his living room was all those other places. By extension, the city became his home. Interesting way to think about it.
So
yeah.
Craig, the last question.
Okay, last question.
Yeah.
I get to ask you one after this.
Thank you for your nice speech. I have a question about botanic.
About what?
Considering your environmental sensitive and innovative designs, have you ever thought about integrating structural systems shaped by a natural process such as botanic architecture into your projects? What is your approach to this approach?
I didn't hear everything you said. What was the first?
Botanic.
What?
Botanic.
I don't know. Does anyone know?
Türkçe alayım.
Botanik bitkisel sistemlerin strüktürel olarak yapıda kullanılmasına verilen bir mimari yaklaşım diye geçiyor. Bitkileri strüktür olarak kullanıyorlar. Ferdinand Ludwig'in bir yaklaşımı var bunun için. Bitkileri gövdelerini çakıştırarak yeni bir sistem strüktür elde ediliyor. Bunun üstünden bir mimari elemanı oluşturulmuş oluyor.
Yeah, I understand now. Thank you. Well, many of the things I showed of our work has that quality. The sun canopies are using inspirations from actually trees that exist in that area. The canopy in New York City is also built from an understanding of structural stability from types of plants that we are aware of. Now, if that's part of your question, I think that has been used by many architects throughout the ages. Even in your ancient architecture here in Turkey, you'll see them using nature as an inspiration. Spirals, wave shapes, they all have structural integrity. But if you go beyond that, and if you're asking, are we using actual living things to make structures? Yeah, that's more challenging, of course. The first thing you need to ask yourself is, does that living thing want to be made into a structure? Hey, I'm just a tree. I want to stand out here and, you can cut my wood away, but please don't make me hold up this building for the rest of my life. And how long can it last as a living creature doing those kinds of things? So you have to go to a different scale, smaller scale. There are many studies being done right now using living matter to build materials. But it's not at the scale of a tree. It's a cellular, smaller scale. Building up material through basically the genetics of a mushroom or things that can regenerate itself are coming to terms today. So I'm certain that in the near future those technologies will advance. We do a little bit of that study in our studio in Oslo, and we're making some headway. There's certainly been some tiles that have been made that are organic, but it's not at the scale of a full creature. It's of the components of those creatures.
All right.
Is that it?
Yes.
All right.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. It was a pleasure. It was a pleasure. Kıymetli misafirler, bize katıldığınız için, bu saate kadar bizimle beraber olduğunuz için çok teşekkür ederiz. İyi mimarlık uygulamalarının yaşam kalitemizi arttırdığına inanıyoruz. VitrA olarak her zaman olduğu gibi bu doğrultuda çalışmalarımızı da sürdürmeye devam ediyoruz. Daha iyi bir geleceği hep birlikte tasarlamak üzere iyi akşamlar diliyorum.